Winning Blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room. Detroit Lions.
Welcome, you are in the Lab Room, back on another installment of the Lab Room's Lab Follow-Up. Again, the sequel to the Lab reports that we did at the beginning of the season. And we're talking Detroit Lions. We're going in draft order. We're at the number 5 slot in the draft, and that is where we find the Detroit Lions. And it's funny, it's ironic. I was talking to my dad before the season started, and two teams my dad pointed out that he really wanted to see if they were for real. He said the Cincinnati Bengals and the Detroit Lions. They went to the postseason, and he said, I'm not sold on either one of these teams. Want to see if they can do it again. Duplicate what you did last season. And I told him, I don't think the Bengals will, but I'm not sure if the Lions are going to go away. They got a lot of talent. Who can stop Megatron? Seems like Matthew Stafford, if he can stay healthy, is going to be one of these quarterbacks that's going to throw for close to 5,000 yards every season. They have an explosive offense. If this defense can just be manageable, I don't see how they could not win 8, 9 games and give themselves a chance to make the postseason. I was wrong. I had it flip-flop. The Cincinnati Bengals were the team that made the postseason that were for real, and the Detroit Lions were absolutely not for real. And to me, that's sad. And honestly, you got to give them a pass. One, they play in a really tough division. Who saw the Minnesota Vikings really stepping up and being a thorn in the side of the Detroit Lions as they were? The thing you need to know first and foremost about the Detroit Lions, they were 0-6 in their division. You don't win in your division, you're going to be a very, very bad team. And that's when I knew that this Lions team wasn't the same and wasn't going to be that good of a team this season. I was a little wary after that initial win in week 1 against St. Louis. I said, man, this game's been really close. In fact, the Rams were winning that game for the most part all game long. I mean, they took the lead somewhere in the second quarter, and they didn't relinquish that lead until the absolute last possession for the Lions in the fourth quarter. And so that was a scary game. I said, wow. They came dangerously close to losing that game. But I said, you know what? That's the new Rams under Jeff Fisher. They're going to be scrappy. I chalked it up to the Rams just being better, not the Lions being worse. And so I dismissed that. But then when they lost to Minnesota at home, I said, wait, is Minnesota that good, or is Detroit just not as good as I thought they were? I got my answer. Because Minnesota was better than I thought they were going to be. But they shouldn't be walking into Detroit and winning 13 or 14-13 or 14-10, whatever the score was, not scoring an offensive touchdown, but scoring 2 touchdowns on returns. Percy Harvin started that game off with a touchdown return on a kickoff, and then they let Marcus Sherrills run a punt return back, and that was all the points the Vikings needed in that game to win, with 2 touchdowns, none coming from the offense. That let me know right there, these aren't the Detroit Lions that really took the NFL by storm offensively a season ago. And that let me know that these Lions aren't as good as I thought they were going to be. I didn't know their season was going to be as long as it was. I didn't know they were going to be a 4-12 team. I just thought that they were going to be a 7-9 team, a 6-10 team. No worse than 6-10, however. Boy, was I wrong. This Detroit Lions team really was not good. And I want to get into some of the reasons why I think they weren't good in 2012, why I don't think they'll be good moving forward, and why I was surprised they were able to win as many games as they were in 2011. Before I get into the reasons why, I want to talk quickly about my research question that I had for the Detroit Lions on my lab report before the season started. And sometimes you can foreshadow things. I ask these questions for a reason on my lab reports because I feel like they're pertinent questions. And my research question to the Lions was, can the Lions build off of their 2011 playoff berth and start to become a team that makes it to the postseason every year? Or was that 2011 season a figment of our imagination? Seems like 2011 was 10 years ago because they were so bad in 2012. Does it seem like just last year this was a 10-win team that made it to the postseason and was scoring all those points and racking up all those yards? Seems like a far cry. But it was just last year, and I asked that question for a reason, and I got my answer. It was a figment of our imagination because these are the reasons why I think this Lions team will always be hindered at some point. I'm not a big Jim Schwartz fan. I think that he is hot under the collar. I think he's a little bit too emotional on the sideline. I think sometimes he wears his emotions on his sleeve. And I think that sometimes that's a detriment to this team. You saw it firsthand on Thanksgiving when he throws the challenge flag in a rage because he knows it's a bad call. He sees what's transpiring. He forgets the rules for a second. In his haste of wanting them to get the call right, he throws the challenge flag out there. Cost his team a touchdown in a game that they were really dominating up until that point. He cost his team a touchdown, and it ultimately cost them the game. They lose in overtime. And so Jim Schwartz by himself, I feel like, is a hindrance to this team. His temperament allows for others on the team to feel like it's okay for them to lash out. And so you get conduct that's detrimental to the team, in my estimation. You get guys picking up personal foul penalties and being undisciplined. And you can't have that in the National Football League. And I think it all starts with Jim Schwartz. So I think that there'll always be some sort of restriction on the Lions because Jim Schwartz is their head coach. That's just my personal opinion. Also, for the Lions in 2012, they were -17 in the turnover ratio. Again, we've talked about teams thus far picking high in the draft during our lab follow-ups. And for the most part, all of the teams have one common denominator, one underlying fact, and that is they turn the football over way too much. The turnover differential for these teams, negative in the double digits, and for some of them, in the 20s. My gosh, how do you expect to win games when you're turning it over that many times and you're not getting them back? That's the part that really loses you football games. If you turn it over 3 times, but you get 4 turnovers in that game, you still got a shot to win. You turn it over 3 times, and you only force 1 or you don't force any, chances of you winning are greatly diminished each time you turn it over. And for you to not get any in return really, really lowers any chances of you winning that game. And to have a -17 in the turnover ratio spells trouble for any team, let alone a Detroit Lions team that's very young, that's trying to learn how to win consistently. You can't have that. You just can't have it. And Matthew Stafford was the biggest culprit in 2012. 17 interceptions. He should be too far along in his career to be throwing that many interceptions versus just 20 touchdowns. That's not a good touchdown to turnover or interception ratio. If you're a quarterback of Matthew Stafford's caliber, you shouldn't be throwing 17 interceptions over just 20 touchdowns. And I felt like a big part of the early season struggle for the Detroit Lions was their inability to get in the end zone. I felt like they settled for way too many field goals early on in the season. They picked it up later on in the season, but their inability to make possessions count. You look at their stats, and for the Detroit Lions, the stats don't tell the story in the 2012 season. You look at their stats up and down. They dominated their opponents. Time of possession, yardage, first downs, you name it. Even the touchdown discrepancy isn't that big. Normally with teams that are this bad, you look at the touchdowns that they've given up to their opponents versus the touchdowns that they've scored on the season, and it's not even close. Sometimes the opponents have scored 20 more touchdowns than the team that we're talking about. That's not the case for the Lions. Their opponents only scored 10 more touchdowns than them. That's not that many more touchdowns. You look at it and you say, hey, that's 70 more points. That explains why they lost so many games, but that's not as big as a discrepancy as some of these other teams. Their problem was the turnovers and the fact that they didn't get in the end zone to finish off drives. They had more yards than their opponents. Their time of possession was better than their opponents. They controlled many games and didn't win because they couldn't score touchdowns. The Lions, this is what epitomized their season right here. An 11-play, 82-yard drive that eats up 6 minutes and 17 seconds of the clock that results in a 37-yard Jason Hanson field goal. How many times can you do that? You can't win like that. And that was the problem for the Detroit Lions in this season. Too many possessions ending in Jason Hanson field goals. And he was money for him. You want to end those possessions with touchdowns. And last year, they were. This year, they weren't. And that was the biggest difference for me in last year's season and this year's season. Because when you throw the football as much as the Detroit Lions do, you're going to have turnovers. That's just the nature of the beast. But last year, those possessions were ending in touchdowns. This season, those possessions were ending in field goals. Touchdowns win you games. Field goals lose you football games. Simple as that. Touchdowns win you games. Field goals don't. You kick 5 field goals, you lose the game 21-15. It happens. Got to score touchdowns when you get in the red zone. Think the Detroit Lions didn't do enough of that in the 2012 season. So if you're the Lions, you got a few issues you need to iron out moving forward. One, Titus Young. And I feel like guys like Titus Young exist on rosters because of coaches like Jim Schwartz. They allow guys like this that are cancer to fester in their locker room. Titus Young is not a guy you want on your roster. Now, I don't see him in practice every day. I don't know him personally. Maybe he just had a nervous breakdown and decided that he was going to sabotage his team. But anytime you sabotage your team, and sabotage means purposely try to help your team lose or bring your team down, I don't want you on my team. I can't trust you anymore, no matter what you say. And so issues like this don't occur often in the National Football League. But if it was going to happen on a roster, it'd be on the Detroit Lions because Jim Schwartz allows it to. What do you do with Titus Young? Do you cut him loose? How can he play another down for you? How can you trust him after he admitted to sabotaging your offense? How can you put him in the game and feel confident that he's not going to tank it? You can't. I felt like Ryan Broyles started to come on, and then he tore his ACL. It was just that type of season for the Detroit Lions. Nate Burleson went down early in the season. So all they had was Heavens to Megatron. And he was Mr. Do-It-All. He is now the NFL's single-season receiving yards record holder. He's a new holder. He took it from Jerry Rice, and he did it on his own. I mean, of course, Matthew Stafford was getting him the football, but this man was getting 11, 12, 14 attempts his way a game. He was getting targets left and right. And so, yeah, he was one of the leaders in the league among guys dropping the football. But what do you expect when the guy is getting 15 targets a game? My gosh. There was no one on the other side of the field to take pressure off of him. So, I don't get mad when he drops the football. You want him to catch everything. You'd like him to catch everything. It'd be more ideal if he caught everything. But when you throw it to someone that many times, and the defense knows he's getting the ball that many times, and they're keying in on him, they're trying to take shots at him, what do you expect sometimes to happen? The ball's going to hit the ground sometimes. But make no mistake about it, Megatron was as advertised in 2012. It was not his fault that the Lions ended up 4-12. He did his part to try to help them win football games. Brandon Pettigrew needs to be more consistent. He's a guy that drops the football way too much for my liking. They need help out wide. Nate Burleson got injured. Someone needed to step up. Brian Broyles started to be that guy. Then he got injured. I kind of like this Durham guy that they brought on late in the season. He's a big, tall guy out of Georgia. I want to believe he was a teammate of Matthew Stafford in college. I like that guy. He's big. And big is good in the National Football League if you can catch. And it seems like, by all indications, watching him later on in this season, he can catch the football. So he could be someone moving forward that could take a little bit of pressure off of Calvin Johnson. But that's on the offensive side of the ball. Let's not just focus on the offense. This defense wasn't very good in 2012. And Bob Sanders Jr., if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Louis Delmas. What are you going to do with him? He's never healthy. When he is, he makes a difference. When he's not, you guys lose football games by the handfuls. So what do? Because you got to do something. I saw way too much of John Wendling this season. I saw way too much of John Wendling. I'm not supposed to see that much of him. He's not supposed to be on the field in that capacity that much. So you need to do something. Because I don't believe in Amari Spivey either. You need to do something at the safety position. Your corners aren't the worst. They're not the best. But they need help back there. They need a safety back there that they can rely on. Don Carey wasn't bad this season. Chris Houston, he had his moments. Drayton Florence, a solid veteran presence in that secondary. They weren't the problem. The problem was the safeties. Guys kept getting behind this defense. Bad safety play. You can't hide bad safety play. You can try all you want. But at the end of the day, good teams find bad safeties. And the Lions had bad safety play in 2012. That's something that needs to be addressed. Don't be surprised if one of their early round draft selections is a safety. My gosh, they need a safety in the worst way. Cliff Averill had a solid season. Ndamukong Suh, I thought, returned to his dominant form in 2012. I thought he really played well, had 8 sacks from the defensive tackle position. That's always a welcome sign for the Lions. I think that the defense needs to build off of some of these guys, but that safety position needs to be better. So for the Lions, it's really simple. Better coaching, less turnovers, help for Calvin Johnson. I think one of your early picks needs to be devoted to addressing that safety position. I just think that the success of the Lions of late has really been tied to production out of the safety position, mainly Louis Delmas. And you can't really rely on Bob Sanders Jr. to stay healthy. So you need a reliable safety back there. And so I think that the Lions need to invest in early pick and a quality safety and see if he can be a shot in the arm in the back half of that secondary. Another thing that I've noticed, the running game was solid this season. Joique Bell, Mikael LaShore, Sr. I thought that they were really solid, but you know what they're missing? Speed. They're missing that element of speed. Both of those guys are big, bulky, tough ball carriers. They're not going to outrun you with their speed. They're not going to surprise or sneak up on anybody with any kind of electrifying speed. They're just ball carriers that can bruise you and punish you and get extra yardage after contact. But they need that slasher, that guy that can be a problem out of the backfield catching the football, as well as a home run threat to take it the distance every time he touches it. They're missing Javid Best is what I'm trying to say. And who knows if he's ever coming back. So at this point, if you're the Lions, find yourself a speed back in the draft. Find a guy that runs a sub 4.5 40, that can move, that can be productive out of the backfield. Not someone to tote it 25 times a game. Not asking you to find a guy that is an elite back in college football and that can come in and start from day one. Just asking you to find a change of pace, third down type back with some speed to add a different element to this Detroit Lions offense. Someone that can catch a screen, make a couple of guys miss, and go. Someone that can run a draw play, hit a hole, and go. Someone that out of the backfield can catch a wheel route up the sideline, beat a linebacker one-on-one, and run by him and score a touchdown. They're missing that in Detroit right now. So I had the Lions going 9-7 on my lab report. Ouch. I thought that the Lions were a team that I didn't think they were going to make the playoffs. I didn't think 9-7 was going to be enough to make the postseason. But I did think, however, Matthew Stafford was starting to get it. He was staying healthy. And so I didn't think he was going to throw 17 interceptions. Who knows how many fumbles he had to go along with those 17 picks. And only throw 20 touchdowns. Okay, so you throw 17 picks. How about throwing 33 touchdowns to offset those 17 picks? He only threw 20 touchdowns. I expect him to be much better, but again, when you're throwing to one man and one man only, it happens. They need help. Hopefully Ryan Broyles can come back. Hopefully Durham is someone that they can rely on moving forward. Hopefully Nate Burleson comes back and he's in good shape. Hopefully they start to get more consistency out of their tight end position. Their tight end position should be better. Scheffler and Pettigrew should be better than they are. They should be getting more out of those guys. So let's see if next year brings about change for this Lions offense, for this Lions team in general. Let's see what the offseason holds. They got to redo some contracts. I mean, Matthew Stafford is slated to make a boatload of money. And I don't know if they're going to redo his deal or not. But between him and Calvin Johnson, they got a lot of money tied up in two players. And if you want to become better, you got to share the wealth. You got to spread that money around. And they got a lot of money. Unfortunately for the Lions, they were one of the last teams to really cough up that rookie money for the top draft choice. They were one of the last teams. I think the Rams might have got Bradford and he might have snuck in right before they made that rookie wage scale. But nonetheless, the Lions are on the hook for a lot of money to Stafford. And so between him and Calvin, someone's going to have to redo their deal to free up some cap space so they can go out and get some free agents and help this team along. But draft-wise, they need to address that secondary, and it'd be nice to get another linebacker too. I think up front with this defense with Nick Fairley, Ndamukong Suh, Cliff Averill, you're set at defensive line. Kyle Bandenbosch is still playing at a significantly productive level. You don't need any defensive linemen right now. There's a nice little rotation that you got going on there. Where you need help is at linebacker and at safety. You could use another corner too, but safety is where it's at right now for you. And linebacker. You need more linebackers. You can never have enough linebackers in the National Football League. You can never have enough. They could use more linebackers. They need a safety. That's a definite. And offensively, they need a running back that can change the game. Someone with some game-changing speed. They lack that in their backfield right now. Joique Bell, Mikael LaShore Sr., guys that can run the football and run it effectively in this league. But they need some speed. Do the Detroit Lions. And that's going to do it for the Detroit Lions in their lab follow-up. Join me on Monday as we talk Cleveland Browns football. That is going to be very interesting. New GM, new head coach, a lot of moving parts. Can't wait to talk Cleveland Browns. So come back as we do our next installment of the Lab Follow-Up series as we tackle every single team in the National Football League in 2013 draft order. I thank you for joining me. Have a good one.
Detroit Lions.